War is the constant theme throughout human history. Almost every major period is defined by widespread combat, leaving mostly terror and destruction in its wake. So, what is war good for? As it turns out, war makes for compelling action video games. More than just an intriguing backdrop for the epic battles taking place, the historical military-themed narratives that define Koei Tecmo games add definition to the theme of fighting like a mythical warrior would. Team Ninja's new passion project builds on the foundation of exhilarating character action games of both their past catalog as well as the renowned work of their contemporary to create an evolved form of combat called Woah, Fallen Dynasty, or as I like to call it, Woah. Arriving almost 3 years to the date of what is, in my opinion, the best action RPG ever made in Nioh 2, Woah answers the burning question of what would action RPG games feel like with a jump button. Of course, in the interim, while waiting for what is essentially the closest we will probably get to a Nioh 3, Sekiro and even Elden Ring have provided some clarity on this hypothetical. Both of those games grant liberty in flowing through the environments, and they offer more player initiative to how combat procedures can blossom as fights unfold. The jump button is, in my view, an essential gaming mechanic going back to the days of Mario, and should be obligatory for this type of action experience. It's just a fact that the majority of the Souls games do not have this feature, and as a result, it is one of the long-standing reasons why this action genre's combat has felt slow, cautious, and reactionary, almost trapping the player in a defensive loop of dodging out of the way, and hitting back only after the enemy has blown their load and missed. Nioh followed suit and retired the good old X button, making do without it because of the sheer speed of combat in those games and the depth of alternatives that made you adapt to an entirely new way of playing. It's the same reason that Resident Evil 4 doesn't technically have a jump button and never needed one, because the other actions you can do are just too good to care. But for this style of game, to reach the true potential of what is possible, there should be more dimensions to combat, more options to choose from, like Devil May Cry or Bayonetta. While there's no doubt that toppling overgrown monsters with oversized HP pools can lead to very satisfying war cries, forcing the player to fight defensively in the way the encounters often have been engineered in these games has always felt more like a test of patience rather than of your creativity. But war changes, and we've seen positive improvements over the last few genre iterations. Along with Sekiro, Woah now sports a jump button, in addition to doubling down on this approach by instituting the deflect mechanic. However, doing so with a delicate balance that favors the offensive-minded player, and in doing so, lends itself to a feeling so satisfying through perfect parries that a simple dodge button will never feel adequate again. It's clear that Team Ninja is a true competitor to From Software. In Woah, deflecting features far more often and is arguably even more accessible than Sekiro's variant. There's a simple block button too, but this is almost useless as it offers next to no returns in breaking the guard of the enemy. Almost everything the enemy can throw at you can be deflected, which means deflecting not only triggers immensely rewarding dopamine kicks, but it makes the parry mechanic feel a bit more complete than in Sekiro. Unlike Sekiro, there's no degree of getting a deflection. You cannot reliably spam the button over and over and expect to protect yourself, because if you don't hit the deflect in the proper time-sensitive window, you will fail and take huge damage, rather than the chip damage you'd receive for the same in Sekiro. It's all or nothing, high risk and high reward, and always feeling great when you get the muscle memory down. The intelligence of deflect mechanic is the spirit meter, which is a tug-of-war seesaw scale that oscillates between the blue tempo for the player, or orange, which means the enemy is exerting pressure on your stamina, priming you for a stagger. Successful deflections and damage dealt without receiving riposte will lead you to quickly filling up the spirit meter to unleash a heavy attack which deals short-term permanent damage to the stamina of the enemy, setting you up for a big strike that will lower the morale rank and deal massive damage. This takes Sekiro and Nioh's ideas of posture and ki respectively and creates a system with a greater degree of intensity because everything you do or don't do has great repercussions to the battle. If a boss deals spirit damage, it not only recovers its own stamina, but it also increases its own attack power to beef up the successive blows until you bring it back down by damaging or deflecting it. If you fail to deflect a critical strike and it lands, you will lose morale, decreasing your defense and attack power in one strike. This enables you to go on the offensive and encourages it because of the small window of time you have to strike when filling up the spirit meter in either direction. The spirit system and morale system in tandem makes the game both easier and more challenging depending on how the person plays. To me, the deflecting in Woah feels more like a natural extension of the burst counter from Nioh 2. This was strangely the source of some criticism by some people that played Nioh 2, who claimed that burst counters simplified the game, even though anyone who understood them knew that they were used sparingly compared to Sekiro's perilous attacks, which are always praised, and again had an exacting window to perform correctly, which actually varied depending on which guardian spirit you used. It always felt good to burst counter in Nioh 2, and it feels even better in Woah, even though I feel that the game puts almost too much emphasis on deflecting in relation to the other abilities which seem to have been put on the back burner for now. There is more weapon variety in Woah than Sekiro has, but not quite as much as in Nioh 2, which had an entire skill tree specified for each weapon and each playstyle. The magic skills are far more condensed and limiting this time around, useful for experts that know how to counter elements of the 5 phases or in situations where co-op support is needed. It's for this reason that I don't feel completely confident in comparing Woah to Nioh, even though it has the same visual style and shares many of the same attack animations, although I think they're on a new engine this time around. Nioh 2 was the most robust RPG that I've ever seen, and if you wanted to make a build in that game, it would take some serious engineering. This played to the strength of the RPG genre, and gave credence to min-maxing, because a game so difficult and intricate should require effort and understanding of the creative systems by the player, in order to yield the greatest returns on investment once you make a build that finally breaks the game, and earn it, because you grinded it out to put it to good use. Much of the laundry list of statistics has shrunken down in Woah, perhaps at the behest of players who simply wanted to go the Souls route of slapping on random armor pieces to get them through the game. It's a bit of a letdown that the blacksmith features feel limiting by comparison, but there's still so much that I've yet to grasp about the combat system that I'm going to reserve any deep analysis on it until I've done everything in New Game Plus and beyond. What I will say to players who aren't as invested in min-maxing builds is that typically the combinations are interesting enough and game-changing enough to be worth it. If RPGs are about involving the player in an adventure to personalize themselves in ways that only they can, there will be more than enough potential playstyles possible from what loot Woah has to offer to measure up to that philosophy. I've already seen a bit of unique play in co-op and from builds that others have made on YouTube, and I know Team Ninja is bound to supplement Woah with more parameters and free upgrades in the DLCs. In terms of level design, difficulty, and functionality, Woah is very similar to Nioh in the structure of each mission and the arrangement of enemies. Going through levels means taking possession of battle flag checkpoints, many of which are guarded by tougher enemies that gatekeep your morale rank rather than the actual level progress itself. Levels can be ran through, but it's definitely wiser to take your time, clear the enemies out first, and explore for the valuable loot. Missions in Woah are self-contained arenas oriented more for progression towards a boss rather than the surprising exploration. I appreciate this choice of level making because it reminds me of the old way of designing levels with density and replayability. Instead of only fighting a boss once per playthrough, you fight a boss at least once per level, and have the option of returning right away to do it all again if you need to revisit an area for farming or because you just like that level. For only 16 main missions and 30 odd submissions, Wolong levels have good environmental variety, and certainly high replay value, even though the main objectives are predictable from one to the next. The morale system can somewhat trivialize the boss fights, as well as the inclusion of the co-op familiars that can help distract the AI in battle. But this also makes exploring levels and clearing out enemies more necessary and worthwhile, rather than simply speedrunning through them, thinking that you can just go and one-shot the boss. Especially with the modifiers in New Game Plus, the morale system incentivizes playing the levels in full, and offers an additional challenge for players who find over-leveling too easy. Wolong's levels don't rely so much on collectibles and NPC quests, but there are a few neat little critters you'll find in the form of pandas that do serve a slight gameplay function, and while not as cute as Kadamas, are still a nice touch that add to the atmosphere of playing in ancient China. If Team Ninja doesn't make worlds as intricate as From Software does, it's probably because they aren't trying to be as much like Eco as they are. Team Ninja is more like Ninja Gaiden and Devil May Cry, and that's what I enjoy. It is said that storytelling is not the strong suit of Koei Tecmo, but then of course it isn't really the strong suit of video games as a whole. Still, I really enjoyed the storyline of Nioh 2, being charmed by the renditions of that specific and consequential time and place during Japan's modernization in the mid-1500s. Wolong follows the same basic outline, zeroing in on the Warring States period of Old China nearly 2,000 years ago during mid-100 AD. It's a story full of interesting historical figures and a touch of dark magic, retold through beautifully elaborate dream sequences that paint the persons of interest in an honest, non-judgmental light. I'd say Team Ninja did well under the circumstances, because although the time period is not exactly obscure, it was a long time ago and is a hefty story to unpack. I'm interested in doing a deep dive into the lore as I always do, and I'm sure there's more to appreciate than most give it credit for. One thing that I do feel as though Team Ninja skimmed on this time was the music, which really inspired me during my time in Nioh 2. Here, the soundtracks are not remotely memorable, except for perhaps the main theme, which plays near the final battle of the game. The environment of the hub area of the Hidden Village is a nice expansion from the hubs that we are accustomed to seeing in this type of game, but it doesn't add much in terms of functionality. But it is an added place to explore, interact with the NPCs, even though they say very little, and you can count your pandas outside of the main battlefields. I expected more from the sound team because Yugo Kano and Akihiro Manabe are very talented sound designers. Following up a masterpiece is never easy. Nioh 2 is Team Ninja's masterpiece in the modern era, and one of the greatest games out there, especially of its kind. Some would say that From Software has equaled, if not surpassed, their own feats on more than one occasion. They are in rare air in terms of the quantity of great games they have produced in a short time. I dare say that Team Ninja has done enough and half as many titles to meet that same measure of excellence. However, at the moment, I do not view Wolong as the best game that modern Team Ninja has made. That is still Nioh 2 by a long shot. The high expectations for a sequel from Team Ninja may mean that Wolong, or the fabled Nioh 3, depending on how you look at it, is not quite the warm surprise we have been looking forward to, but it cannot be viewed as a letdown, considering that they tried many new things here in Wolong. One thing that I admire about Team Ninja is the work ethic and ambition personified by their leader, Fumihiko Yasuda. He said something inspiring during the Nioh 2 behind-the-scenes documentary, in which he invoked the names of the three masters, Katsura Hashino, Shoji Meguro, and Shigenori Sojima. Yasuda said that when people think of Atlas, they think of those three giants, and rightfully so. Yasuda aspired to bring the same kind of household name recognition to Team Ninja, and I feel as though he, along with former Bloodborne and Nioh 2 producer Masaki Yamagiwa, have done just that. I think this team is brilliant, and I couldn't wait for their next project. And I'm looking forward still to more updates, DLC, and whatever is next for the ninjas. To score Wolong Fallen Dynasty strictly a launch, I'm going to be conservative and give the game an 8 out of 10. A good game indeed. And my breakdown for the score is as follows. I think that with the added DLC, Wolong could easily get up to a 9 out of 10. The same score I gave Sekiro and slightly below what I gave to Elden and Nioh, the pinnacles of this brand of combat. Wolong may be about the fall of a dynasty, but it shows that Team Ninja is still on the rise.